Hello. I would join if I could, but
You should be able to add my Microsoft, and then you can join that way.
and I have a Switch and PC.
You should be able to add my Microsoft account if you have Microsoft linked to either of those.
But I can't do multiplayer on PC.
Oh, can you do it on Switch?
For some reason. Yeah, I can on Switch.
Okay, so if you open left, go to the Friends menu. No, that's not right. It's find cross-platform friends and then enter a name here. Whoever you're trying to like add will show up down here and see like friend request or something.
Alright. I Which I do have. Wait. I need Minecraft to load.
Kind of illness or emergency that makes it impossible for them to vote in person. In some states
Can
like
you
Oregon,
rewind the stream
Washington,
back to that
Hawaii,
point?
and Colorado automatically send a ballot to every registered voter, and some people hate this. But now it's probably a good time to talk about some of the misconceptions about the security or security problems
This
of
series
no
here.
excuse mail-in ballots. The main claim that President
4.
Trump and various Republicans are making is that no excuse absentee ballots are less secure than absentee ballots that
Block.
require
What
excuse.
block?
President Trump says that there are very strict protocols for absentee ballots, but that these strict security protocols aren't used for mail ballots, and this is, strictly speaking, not factual. The states
I don't know what
don't
block I
have
should
two
use.
separate systems for voters who will be absent from their voting district and those who prefer to vote by mail. And really, each state has its own security protocols for mailed ballots. And here's a rundown of the most important security
Ooh,
features.
I've got a
One
good
is that
idea.
a ballot cannot be mailed to a person unless they are an eligible and registered voter. This means that a person must fill out registration forms and have their address confirmed. Ballots can't be forwarded to a new address, which means that a person must
I
also
don't think
have
I
an
have a
address to
Microsoft
receive
account
ballot
on my
mail.
Switch.
And generally, ballots
Yeah, you'd
arriving
have to
before
connect one
election
to be
day
able to
are
join.
stored in a secure room. Some states use security cameras to monitor the rooms. Some received ballots also are stored using special
This
locks,
is
such
gonna
as
be a
locks that require
giant chain
bipartisan
command.
teams to open. And ballots often have a barcode, and this means that a voter can only be issued one ballot. In states with barcoding, it's incredibly difficult, if not effectively impossible, to just simply fill out a new ballot for someone who has already mailed in a ballot and had their barcode registered. And often states that mail every voter a ballot use multi-layer security envelopes and signature matching. And signature verification is one of the major security checks that states use to track ballots. Every ballot is tracked in an election management system that tries to prevent double voting, and often every signature that is returned on every ballot is then checked against the signature on file with the voter's registration. Local officials then determine if the ballot was returned by
I forgot if it's slash
the U.S.
place
Postal Service
block.
recently sent a vote-by-mail kit to over 11,000 local election officials. These kits encourage them to adopt best practices, including the post office's intelligent mail barcode, which lets mailed ballots be fully documented as
it's
they
slash
move
set
to and
block.
from
Okay.
voters, and can make it easier to identify legal votes. But obviously, no system is perfect, and these measures haven't stopped the president from predicting mass voter fraud. But let's talk about voter fraud and how that differs from voter suppression. Voter fraud is the illegal behavior of individual voters, whether you are fraudulently creating duplicate votes or you
61.
are fraudulently voting on behalf of someone who you're not supposed to be voting
I'm
for.
not supposed to
Voter
put the
suppression
commas
is any
here.
effort by the government or other individuals to prevent or discourage eligible voters from registering to vote or voting itself. Unfortunately, there's a long history of voter suppression tactics in this country. They can be very simple and violent measures to prevent people from voting, like the murders of James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, who were killed for registering black voters in Mississippi in 1964. Other suppression tactics include requiring forms of identification people have difficulty obtaining, or limiting the hours for early voting
Why
so that
was
people
that
have to
even
balance family and work
like? It didn't
obligations
take
with the
put the
need to
lever in my
show up on
inventory.
election day. This is one reason why often people argue that election day should be a national holiday so that more people have the opportunity to vote and don't need to make a
That's
choice
flavor
between
1. What's
going
flavor
to their
0?
job and voting in a national election. And other voter suppression
My
tactics can include
Minecraft
trying
needs to update.
disenfranchise people. For example, making
Okay.
a rule that all felons are unable to vote. That is not a constitutional requirement, that if you are convicted of a felony, you automatically lose the right to vote. Suppression tactics can also include using software.
Why are these so out of
roster
order?
of eligible voters, and sometimes all of these tactics come together. For example, Florida purged thousands of alleged felons from voter rolls in 2000. This was before the recent Florida constitutional amendment that allowed felons to vote, which is highly controversial and is up in the courts as we speak. But in that particular case, later investigators discovered that the system purged many people without felony convictions simply because they had the same birth date as a felon, or the first 4 letters of their name seemed to match a felon's. And in Georgia in 2018, Brian Kemp, who was then Georgia's Secretary of State, purged the voter rolls by eliminating 850,000 voters who hadn't voted in a while. This was called the use it or lose it approach, and Kemp was then elected governor that year.
I'm Brian Kemp. This is Jake, young man interested in one of my daughters.
Yes, sir. But apart from voter suppression, which is its own thing and deserves its own video, there is voter fraud, which is ostensibly what a lot of people in the Trump administration are worried about. So what is voter fraud and how common is it? Well, there are several different categories of potential voter fraud, and let's start with something called double voting.
7.
Double voting is when a person votes twice. Obviously, one person can only
Gray.
vote
I think
once
I
in a
know
particular
8
election.
is like
Now, to prove
lime,
double voting, you
lime
need proof
pink,
that someone voted more than once.
or
And most
black,
states
or
require voting
purple.
documentation to be saved, such as
Oh, it's
signed
gray.
ballots. Double voting is actually
Last time I
extremely rare.
used
The
this,
reason
it
for
was
this is just
funky.
that it isn't worth it for
It's messing with
criminal
stuff.
conviction to add one incremental
I was
vote to
thinking
a
of
candidate. It's only
9.
when any particular candidate is going to have
I think
thousands
10
and
is like
thousands of
red
votes.
or
Each
11.
act of voter fraud in connection with a federal election risks 5 years in prison and a $10,000
There's
fine,
the
in addition
lime
to
or
any
light
state
pink,
penalties. For double voting
lavender,
to throw an
I
election,
guess.
you would need thousands of people in a jurisdiction willing to take that risk, or you'd need
Where's
one
the
person
red?
to vote many, many times, which increases the chance of getting caught. Often, what appears to be a double vote is actually just confusion about the person's identity. In 2004, for example, 2 Kathleen
13.
Sullivans living in New Jersey were confused for each other. That's a mistake, but not voter fraud. Then you have the classic kind of voter fraud involving
There it is.
dead voters. The
Court.
media frequently runs stories about dead people voting, only to find out after further investigation that this is based on clerical errors. More often than the clerical errors, though, is that people simply cast an absentee ballot, and then in the interim, before the election is over, they pass away. And while there are certainly stories of people filling the ballot boxes with the names of the deceased at the turn of the 20th century and things like the Chicago political machine of 100 years ago, in the modern era, this kind of voter fraud is extraordinarily rare. Another common claim is that people will register with fraudulent addresses like vacant lots or storage units in order to get more votes. This obviously runs into the same
What?
problems with trying to use the same name to be able to vote more than once. But not many fake address claims have been substantiated over
What?
the years, and some states
Is that
maintain a
really
list
number
of
2?
properties and lots that are allegedly
I thought
vacant,
that was
only to find out later
not
that they
number
actually now hold houses. This actually happened in Missouri in the year 2000. Officials also mistakenly challenged people like Barbara Taylor, a Washington voter who listed her address as a storage facility. It turns out that Taylor managed the storage company and lived in an apartment on site and had lived there for 12 years. Her address was in fact legitimate. And then there's the possibility of felony barred voters. And this one's controversial because in many states, people who are convicted of felonies are
Ye-
allowed to vote. Ironically, it's actually far more likely that a state will purge eligible voters from the voting rolls when they're trying to purge felons than it is for people who are convicted of
I have a
felonies,
drift on my
for
controller that
accidentally
goes
voting
forward.
or even intentionally voting despite the felony conviction. And then finally, there is the possibility of voting by non-citizens. President Trump and his advisors claim that non-citizen immigrants voted en masse. There's been no evidence of
5.
illegal immigrants really voting at all, let alone in large numbers. This could be because the penalty for illegally
Nope.
voting is deportation, while the payoff is minuscule, again, one marginal vote in a general election. And of the few documented cases where an ineligible immigrant voted, most involve innocent mistakes. Sometimes
Is it
people who are
bold?
going through the naturalization process are given voter registration forms, which they turn in before they
There we
actually
go.
become naturalized citizens. And it's worth considering how difficult this kind of fraud would be to pull off at scale. In Hawaii in 2000, there were allegations that 533 non-citizens registered to vote. But an investigation revealed that 144 of those registered voters actually became citizens and then were eligible to vote. At least 61 asked the state to cancel their registrations when they realized that they were ineligible. 2 others were stopped at the polls by poll workers and never voted, and there were no reports substantiating that any ineligible immigrant actually voted in that election. So it's worth asking,
Where's that
how
lime
widespread
color?
is election fraud? Well, the Heritage Foundation, which is known as a fairly conservative think tank, maintains a database of documented instances of voter fraud. They found that over the
Let's
past
try
20
5
years,
again.
about 250 million votes have been cast by mail-in ballot nationally.
Oh,
And during
perfect.
that time, there have been just over 1,200 cases of
I
fraud
always
of
have to
all
select the
forms,
delay into it.
resulting in 1,100 criminal convictions. Of these cases, 204 involved fraudulent use of absentee ballots. 143
Now I gotta find a
resulted in criminal
blue.
convictions. That amounts to about 0.0006% of all votes cast. So when you break that down, that works out to an average of maybe 7 or 8 cases of fraud involving mailed or absentee ballots per year nationally. And remember, Oregon has been mailing ballots to all registered voters for 20 years. So far, 50 million
Let's
ballots
see
have been
6.
cast in Oregon alone, with just 2 verified fraud cases resulting in conviction.
Okay,
That's
that doesn't work 'cause I need a blue.
0.00004%. But that's not to say that
8.
we shouldn't be concerned about the security of our vote. Obviously, the strength of our democracy relies on our votes being authentic and
11,
secure.
that might
But we
be a
should also
purple.
probably consider what kinds of fraud cases
I need a
have
blue,
been
so-
discovered recently. As it regards
Oh,
mail-in ballots,
perfect.
the answer is that there's been almost no fraud considering the millions of ballots that have been cast. Of course, you don't have to take my word for it. You can actually take the word of the Trump campaign itself, because the Trump campaign is actually filing suit in a number of different states to try and prevent changes to the way that elections are run, to make it easier for people to vote. And in particular, the Trump campaign is
12
actually
red again.
suing in Pennsylvania to stop the
Nope,
legislature from
brown.
allowing people to vote via drop-off mailboxes in places other than designated voting stations. The Trump campaign alleged that there was widespread voter fraud in Pennsylvania, and therefore the changes could not take place. After a lengthy discovery battle where the defendants demanded that the Trump campaign actually provide evidence of the fraud that they claim was taking place,
Orange
the
blue.
judge ordered the Trump campaign to provide the evidence of widespread voter fraud that the Trump campaign claimed existed. And when push came to shove, the Trump campaign provided basically a half dozen news articles
gonna
that sort
break
of
this
did things
controller.
going on, which did not actually talk about widespread mail-in voter fraud. So the Trump campaign's best evidence basically showed nothing of the kind. And notice I said the Trump
13.
campaign rather than the president himself, because it's the company that runs the president's re-election campaign that is responsible for these lawsuits, which is incredibly problematic because the campaign can use all the funds at its disposal, which includes the funds that people have donated for the president's re-election. Those kinds of campaign contributions are being used to further what a lot of people are calling voter suppression tactics, to roll back amendments to voting laws which would
I think
allow
it's gonna
for
be 5.
increased enfranchisement of people in states like Pennsylvania and Nevada. And believe it or not, the biggest verified election fraud scandal in recent history was actually committed in North Carolina by Republican operative Leslie McCrae Dowless, who in 2019 was charged with 3 felony counts of obstruction of justice, 2 counts of conspiring to
19.
commit obstruction of justice, 2 counts of possession of absentee ballots, perjury, and solicitation to commit perjury. Operatives working for Dallas illegally collected and sometimes filled in absentee
cool,
ballots on
pretty
behalf
cool.
of Republican Mark Harris's campaign.
Too bad
Harris
that
won
doesn't
by less
exist.
than 1,000
So.
votes, and as a result of the fraud, the state ordered a new election. Now, regardless of whether there is extensive documentation of actual
The block
voter
couldn't be
fraud or not,
placed.
that hasn't stopped the
Why?
president from saying that he wants to do something to change the election. So the question is, can the president change the entire elective system through executive order? And the answer is that the president does not have the constitutional authority to make unilateral changes to the election system. These issues are largely enshrined in federal statutes and state law, which an executive order can't really touch. But the president can undermine voting and confidence in the outcome of the election. And that may be what the president is doing. Recently, new Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, a Trump donor, just instituted changes in the way that the U.S. Postal Service works, reducing overtime for postal workers, even if that means that mail is ready to be sits at the argues that this is all about building an
Here
efficient
we
postal
go.
service. But the timing of these changes coincides with the president's outbursts and tirades against mail-in voting. House Representative Carolyn Malone recently sent a letter about the reported operating changes to DeJoy, complaining that the, quote, increases in mail delivery timing would impair the ability of ballots to be received and counted in a timely manner. To many people, the sudden changes to the U.S. Postal Service look like a voter suppression tactic. A majority of states reject ballots if they aren't delivered by Election Day, even if they are postmarked in advance. So a slowdown in the mail could be disastrous for mail-in ballots that are sent far ahead of time that just simply don't arrive by Election Day. And the president has repeatedly stated that the election must be decided on the same day that voting takes place, even though there is no federal or state law that requires the actual outcome to be decided on the same day. In reality, the outcome of the presidential election is not official until the completion of the canvass of votes and certification of the results. The canvass means aggregating and confirming every valid ballot cast and counted, which includes absentee, early voting, election day, provisional, challenged, uniformed, and overseas citizens. This doesn't happen in one night. Election Day is November 2nd. States have until December 8th, 2020 to resolve election disputes. And this means recounts and lawsuits must be completed by then. And states have a minimum of 35 days to certify who won the most votes in that state. The person with the most votes wins each state's electors, with a few exceptions. And the Electoral College meets on December 14th, 2020 and casts their ballots. The ballots are, of course, immediately transmitted to various people, and December 23rd is the deadline for receipt of all electors' ballots from all of the states. However, there's no penalty for missing that particular deadline. On January 6, 2021, Congress is going to meet to count the votes, and Inauguration Day is going to be January 20th, 2021. But as promised, the Trump campaign is actually making
I need to
good on the
rotate it
president's
in the
threats to
other
try and
way.
stop mail-in voting. And the Trump campaign has actually sued the state of Nevada over the state's new law expanding mail-in voting for the 2020 general election. According to the lawsuit, making all voters a ballot makes voter fraud, quote, inevitable. The lawsuit also claims that mailing all voters' ballots disenfranchises rural voters, violating the Equal Protection Clause. The lawsuit takes issue with a section of the law requiring county clerks to, quote, establish procedures for the processing and counting of ballots. The Trump campaign's problem with this is that it's up to each county clerk to establish the best procedures for counting rather than a uniform system statewide. And you may agree or disagree with the various different counties' systems that they put in place in which there was a standardized system throughout the state, but the president's campaign doesn't have a role in making Nevada law. And remember, the Constitution gives the states the right to administer their own elections. And it probably shouldn't surprise you that making an equal protection claim on behalf of rural voters doesn't make any sense at all. They're not a protected class, and I don't see how an equal protection claim works in this particular context. Now, personally, I think as many people of all stripes, whether Democrat or Republican, should vote. Voting is a public good, and both federal and state governments should take more steps to facilitate voting, especially in these COVID times. And mail-in voting seems like a pretty
Appreciate
easy
if I
step
could
to
turn
make
that
happen. Because
at
we're
all
staying home more
downwards.
often. Not just because of COVID, but because it's so ridiculously hot out. And I've heard stories of people attending Zoom calls with formal business attire on top and swimming trunks on the bottom. I, of course, would never do that. But if I did do that, I'd wear Mack Weldon's awesome swimming trunks. I'm also not going to rip the suit off when I finish this video and jump in the pool wearing Mack Weldon's designer swim trunks to look great in and out of the water. But here's a picture of the last time I wore those trunks. That's definitely me, and not a stock photo of a model. I really needed a tan there. Mack Weldon is a men's essential clothing company that focuses on smart design and premium fabrics. If I'm not in court or on a Zoom call with the judge, I'm often wearing Mack Weldon. And I've tried
5.
their polos, their t-shirts, and their shorts, and of course their world famous boxer briefs. And if you're watching this channel, you're an adult and you probably deserve to have really nice boxer briefs. And I can tell you they make a world of difference. I've ordered Mack Weldon with my own money multiple times, and it's really easy because I've had multiple sizes shipped to try on, and then I just returned the ones that didn't fit and kept the ones that fit perfectly.
11.
And if you would like to try Mack Weldon and you'd like 20% off your first order, just go to mackweldon.com/legaleagle or use the promo code legaleagle at checkout. Or you can click on the link in the description. And with Mack Weldon's loyalty program, you can get 20% off, free shipping, and access to new products first.
10.
It's automatic when you sign up and order at mackweldon.com/legaleagle, or you can click on the link in the description. And with Mack Weldon's loyalty program, you can get 20% off with free stripping. No, there will not be any free stripping. With Mack Weldon's loyalty program, though, you can get 20% off with free shipping and access to new products. It's automatic when you sign up and order at mackweldon.com/legaleagle, or use the promo code legaleagle at checkout for 20% off your first order. And of course, clicking on that link really helps out this channel. And if you want to try out their famous boxer briefs, you can decide for any reason that you're not satisfied, and you can just keep them and still get a free refund, because who wants to return used underwear? So, do you agree with my analysis? Do you think that voter fraud is a real issue, or is it really just the tail wagging the dog? Leave your objections in the comments, and check out my
Now
other
if I
law
set this
reviews
to
over here, where I talk
repeat,
about all of the crazy things coming out of the
needs
Trump administration
redstone.
and all the legal issues that we've never had to deal with. So just click on this playlist, and I'll see you in court.
Excuse me, why does this work every... Oh wait, these can't do it the way they are. Gotta be impulse.
Thanks to Mack Weldon for keeping Legal Eagle in the air, helping me look fly. Well, because this is clearly the darkest timeline many have asked, and now I must answer the question, what if the president refuses to leave the White House?
Oh yeah, the always active part.
You'll never take me alive, coppers. Get him!
What am I watching?
Hey, Legal Eagles, it's time to think like a lawyer and the Secret Service.
Really
As I
listening
discussed in
to.
a recent video, Joe Biden is now the clear winner of the 2020 election, and Donald Trump's lawsuits are not going to be enough to change that result. After it looked obvious that President Trump could not get enough votes to be reelected, the media started asking whether President Trump would make a concession speech. President Trump did not win enough votes to win the election, but he has so far refused to concede his loss. And although no president has ever refused to leave office, other elected officials in the U.S. have thrown tantrums after losing an election. In 1874, Texas Governor Edmund Davis locked himself in the basement of the state capitol building after losing to Richard Koch. Like Trump, Davis claimed that there had been voter fraud, and the state Supreme Court, with 3 judges appointed by Davis, ruled in his favor. But Koch was still inaugurated. Koch then arrived at the state capitol with the sheriff's posse. But Davis appealed to fellow Republican President Ulysses S. Grant for federal troops, but Grant refused. Davis left 3 days later. In 1946, there was a standoff in Georgia known as the Three Governors Crisis, after the governor-elect died before taking office. The outgoing governor thought he had a right to stay, the son of the governor-elect thought he should inherit the office, and the lieutenant governor-elect believed that he was now governor. Bizarrely, the state assembly voted for the son to inherit the office. The 2 other men were still in the building, but that crisis ended when the governor-elect's son changed the locks. But if that happens this year, I'll finally get to collaborate with the lock-picking lawyer. Now, President Trump hasn't locked himself in the bathroom yet, but he is refusing to concede that he lost. Normally, the loser would have given a public concession speech by now. That's what Jimmy Carter did when Ronald Reagan defeated him in 1980, and what George H.W. Bush did in 1992 when he lost his re-election bid to Bill Clinton. But what is a concession speech? Well, it's a public acknowledgement by the loser of the presidential race that he or she has lost the election. This is not a legal requirement, but it is an important norm that ensures the peaceful transfer of power, especially since the incumbent commands, the whole military until the next president takes office. The concession speech generally allows the rest of the steps required to confirm the election results to move forward. After the loser concedes, lots of things happen behind the scenes.
I know why this is happening.
Millions of federal dollars to the transition team, along with access to office space and necessary equipment like computers and money. Under the 2015 Presidential Transitions Improvement Act, which amended the 1963 Presidential Transition Act, the president must establish a White House coordinating committee and council of agency transition directors 6 months prior to the election. Typically, the administrator of the General Services Administration, or GSA, signs a letter when the winner of the race is, quote, apparent. This acts as the federal government's formal declaration that the presidential race is over and
Yeah.
has emerged.
Let's
Although
go.
every agency, including the GSA, has detailed transition plans as required by law, the Washington Post has reported that the plans won't move forward until a winner is declared by the GSA. This could mean a number of different things.
Circle
that
time.
The transition won't happen until Trump gives up, or that everyone is waiting for the Supreme Court to declare a winner. But that's kind of not how this happens. In its guidance in April on how agencies should be preparing, the Office of Management and Budget noted that the committee would meet on May 27th. However, the GSA refused to publish the full minutes of this meeting. We now know that Emily Murphy, the President Trump-appointed administrator of the General Services Administration, is refusing to sign a letter that immediately allows the transfer of power from one administration to the next. When the Washington Post asked her why, her spokesperson said, quote, "An ascertainment has not yet been made, and its administrator will continue to abide by and fulfill all requirements under the law." With these two facts, the OMB censoring the transition meeting notes and Murphy refusing to acknowledge the reality of President Trump's loss, what do those tell us? At a minimum, the Trump team has no intention of cooperating with peaceful transition of power. And both President Trump and members of his cabinet have hinted that they are not going to comply with a peaceful transition. In particular, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, saying that
Controller won't stop drifting, but I can't change controllers because the other one doesn't have a working aux port.
Higher than one might think. The bipartisan 9/11 Commission found that the delayed transition in 2000 between the Clinton and Bush administrations actually made the 9/11 attacks more likely because it hampered the incoming W. Bush administration from focusing on the looming al-Qaeda threat from day one. The delayed transition in 2020 might undermine efforts to distribute a COVID-19 vaccine. As the U.S. hits an all-time high for positive coronavirus tests, the Trump COVID task force has stopped meeting.
I'm not
and its
even
chair, Mike
like
Pence,
touching
is,
the stick I
trying to
used
go
to
on
move.
vacation. But on
The
top of
left
screwing
one.
up the transition,
I'm not
there's
even
all kinds of
touching it.
stuff that a nefarious squatting president could do on the way out.
Gotta make
This probably
sure
deserves
that
its
I
own video,
still
but
stay
those
in this
steps would
area.
include firing not only political
Look how
appointees
bad
who
this
the president
drift is.
doesn't like,
Like,
but also
I
recruiting
really
staff to just
dislike it.
gum up the works. We've seen that already by President Trump firing Defense Secretary Mike
Oh.
Esper and the potential firings of FBI Director Chris Wray and CIA Director Gina Haspel. The president has also named Michael Ellis as NSA General Counsel in these waning months. And you'll remember that name if you've watched my video on how the White House conducted a political motivated review of John
I'm gonna
Bolton's book.
open up this controller
Ellis
and
was
see what's
the
causing
political
that to happen.
operative who took a hatchet to it and prevented it from being published. These could be chaos moves or attempts to install true believers to take affirmative action benefiting President Trump. The president
Actually, I
could
think I
pardon
might
everyone in his
buy a
orbit, including
controller.
his family, his friends, his co-conspirators, and maybe even himself. And
I wanna
that's
buy
not
a new
with respect
controller.
to underlying
Buy some that I can
investigations
like add
themselves. As
LED
National
lights
Security
into it, a new
Analyst Marshall
battery,
Gaba points out, the Trump
a
team
new
should
charger
induce the
port,
Office of Legal Counsel to adopt all kinds of
so I
moral
won't have to use
decisions
this one
that
anymore.
justify the president's prior acts. And to
Because
the
this
extent there are
drift is
actually open
becoming a mighty big
investigations into
issue.
President Trump personally and his family, the Department of Justice can paper over these files, adding memos that justify closing of the cases
Block
or saying that
palette.
the cases were never brought in good faith in the first place, and calling into doubt the evidence that's in those investigatory
How do I pronounce
files.
your name?
And then, of course, there are the files
I think it's
themselves.
Spectre
While destroying
Trey.
records that have administrative
Is your game done
information
updating
or
yet?
evidentiary value under the Presidential Records Act is usually illegal, it's probably a good idea to keep an eye out for gray smoke coming out of the White House chimneys in the coming days. But all of that is during the transitional period. What if Donald Trump remains in denial about the election and continues barking orders at the military and holds on to the football? Well, Joe Biden is scheduled to be sworn in as president at noon on January 20th, 2021. So, as of that date, what happens if President Trump is still throwing a tantrum and won't leave? What if he is a trespasser on the White House grounds? Well, let's start with the Secret Service. The president loses all constitutional authority when his term ends on January 20th, 2021. At this time, he no longer commands the Armed Forces or the Secret Service. Both of those entities will be commanded by Joe Biden. When President Biden arrives at the White House after his inauguration, he'll be accompanied by moving vans and the U.S. Secret Service. The Secret Service is a law enforcement agency within the Department of Homeland Security. The Secret Service has two roles. They investigate counterfeiting and other federal crimes, and they protect national leaders and their families as well as foreign dignitaries. But what happens if a president the Secret Service is sworn to protect decides that he's still president and won't leave the White House grounds? Under the Former Presidents Act, the Secret Service provides lifetime protection to former presidents and their families. President Trump will be assigned a Secret Service protection unit that takes over after he is no longer president. But that doesn't mean that
That's a
President
bit
Trump has legal authority over his post-presidential
maybe
team.
30.
The Secret Service is led by a director. The current director is James
34.
Murray. The director is appointed by and serves at the pleasure of the president and is not subject to Senate confirmation. When Biden becomes president, Murray reports to Biden and not Trump. If it came down to a battle between President Biden's protective team versus Trump's protective team, well, it won't. Because President Biden and Director Murray would order former President Trump's security detail to stand down. But could some members of the Secret Service decide to disobey Biden's orders and fight for Trump? I mean, theoretically, but they'd be committing a felony. Section 3056D of Title 18 prohibits knowingly and willfully obstructing, resisting, or interfering with a federal law enforcement agent.
You know what, I'm
who is
just gonna put it
engaged in
back.
Protective functions. And if former President Trump's security detail was prosecuted under 18 U.S.C. 3056, it's not even necessary to show that Trump's guys used force against federal law enforcement agents. Even blocking the entry to the White House grounds or the White House doors is considered obstruction or resistance. And of course, the law does authorize Secret Service agents to arrest anyone engaging in activity which could nullify or reduce the effectiveness of security precautions taken by the Secret Service. That means if former President Trump's Secret Service team locks the doors to the Oval Office or bathroom, they could be arrested, and the government doesn't even need to prove that this interference was forcible or aggressive.
I decided to make the switch to working as a home health nurse for OSF Healthcare so I can make a difference for patients long term. I'm able to build relationships with patients and provide support for them for as long as it takes to make sure
Is the
they are
blue
successful.
getting
I love the
skipped? I
freedom
guess
of
it's
where
just
I work.
harder to see
I
the
feel like I'm
blue.
able to reach more patients that have new and complex care needs from all ages and backgrounds. This job is never dull or boring. I'm consistently challenged and I put all of my nursing skills to good use. I love what I do at OSF Healthcare.
Ooh, light blocks. Look at this.
Be arrested, and the government doesn't even need to prove that this interference was forcible or aggressive. It's also a felony under 18 U.S.C. 111 to forcibly assault, resist, oppose, impede, intimidate, or interfere with federal law enforcement officers, including
I'm not
Secret
even
Service
touching the
agents,
controller
in the
anymore.
performance of their duties. People who work for Secret Service are well versed in these laws, and many of them have served for decades. It's highly unlikely that large numbers of them would turn the White House into the Alamo. And there are also other Secret Service support units that could be called on to help oust a squatting former President Trump. The Secret Service's Uniform Division protects facilities and venues secured for U.S. Secret Service protectees, including the White House complex and the Vice President's residence at the Naval Observatory. These are probably the people who would be called on to repel any threats to the White House or the Vice President's residence. So if President Trump asked the Proud Boys to no longer stand by, but to actually engage, these are probably the people that would act immediately. And the Secret Service also has some specialized units which could be called upon to remove Trump and his allies. The Emergency Response Team provides a coordinated tactical response for the White House and other protected facilities. The Counter Sniper Team uses observation, sighting equipment, and high-performance weapons to provide a secure environment for protectees. And if a Trump militia were on the scene, those special units would coordinate a response. And then there's also the Motorcade Support Unit, providing motorcycle tactical support for official movements of motorcades, so President Biden would be safely escorted to the White House premises, even if an army of lifted Ford F-250 trucks with giant oversized flags showed up to block President Biden's advance. And frankly, I wouldn't mess around with the Secret Service. They have plenty of firepower to back it up. Agents and officers use the FM-290 submachine gun, the 9mm H&K MP5, a 12-gauge Remington shotgun, and a 5.56
I'm getting
SR-16
off.
QCD rifle. They also have plenty of non-lethal options
For
as
now.
well, like a 16-inch expandable baton and also pepper spray. Now, to be clear, none of this is going to happen. The worst-case scenario is that President Biden would simply kindly ask former President Trump to leave. And I'm sure that President Trump will have plenty to do and plenty of places to go when his term expires. But if push came to shove,